Today is really a peer-to-peer event. I'm not gonna be talking for too long because we really want to give you the platform to share what is up with you, what are your challenges, and what do you think are best practices. I will be around, by the way, to join in on the discussion if you would like me to, but really we would like to give you the platform and some time to really talk things through. But we would like to give you some inspiration or some, let's say, some conversation starters actually to get that conversation going. And that's why I will start with actually 3 chapters of a keynote. The first is, why would you actually, as an organization, start talking about sustainability? What are the benefits of it? Also, why shouldn't you? What are some risks or just arguments against communicating around sustainability? And how can you actually talk about sustainability in a good way? I've heard some people mention, like, I'm not in marketing, or I deal with reputation, or I deal with communication. I think we're all in the same boat in that sense. We all are in a way forming a brand, because a brand is in a way a story in our heads about an organization. So from all of your roles, I do think you play a large role on that brand, and because of that on marketing, whether you're dealing with communication or how you're branding your company internally, talking to people internally. So we're all here together, I think, in bridging that gap between, for sure, sustainability and communications. To get it going, why would you as an organization actually talk or communicate about sustainability? 4 reasons. And the first one is quite obvious, or at least much told about, and that also explains, of course, why so much organizations start doing it. It is to actually make your brand stronger. But there is also actually an increasing amount of evidence that does point into that direction. That if you talk about sustainability strongly, that it can make your brand more trustworthy, first and foremost, that it can really give your company that feeling of being more up to date with what is happening in society, and also that it can give your brand a higher level or perception of quality. So those are all reasons why communicating about sustainability is interesting for your organization. And you see, I think, more and more organizations who also start to do it with a way that really reinforces their brands. And I think Decathlon in Belgium is, in that sense, an interesting organization to follow at the moment, because they are a sportswear organization, as you might know. But in the last year, they've really focused on the core of their business model and connected some sustainable circular initiatives to that. And they've called it the Resports Deals, where they focus on buying back sport clothes, by second-hand selling in sport clothes, renting out stuff, also repairing, and last but not least with new products focusing on eco-design. And they've really found a way to brand market that smartly, and that has really increased their brand perception, not in the least also in a business-to-business context. Because of course, a lot of branding and marketing sounds like we're talking to consumers, but it's also about how do our peers look at us and the companies we source from and the companies we sell to. So making our brand stronger is the first and obvious one. The second, though, and this is now for the HR lens, it's winning the war for talent. Bain and Company, a leading consultancy out there, has done some research in 2019, which says that 6 out of 10 millennials choose their employer mainly for the employer's purpose. In fact, more than 70% of millennials are likely to choose to work for a company with a strong environmental agenda. And this is already research from 2019, we're 2023 at the moment, but it's become ever more prevalent. Also from my role in a sustainability leadership program, where I continuously talk to people from big and small organizations, everybody tells me that when they're having conversations with potential new hires, sustainability is very often part of that conversation. People are asking you what you're doing around that. And if they have a choice, then your environmental agenda or your sustainability agenda is ever increasingly a reason to choose for your company over another company. And it is tough to find talent out there. That's something the HR team will also tell you, right? On the third level, getting investments, or just financing as well. And I hear a lot of big organizations here, so then investments and financing is definitely an interesting level. Also for smaller companies, at some point that might be an interesting deal. And I really think what kind of like set the tone in this conversation is Larry Fink. I see the people from the financial sector at least nodding. So Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. And it's the, let's say, the leading or at least the most prestigious investment company out there in the world. And Larry Fink, as a CEO, he yearly writes this New Year's letter, so to say, to the sector, to tell them what he sees happening, but also what he thinks the financial sector should start doing. And Larry Fink had talked in 2020 already around the climate crisis, and that he really thought that investing in climate solutions was important. But in his 2021 letter, he amplified that message. So instead of just jumping to a new topic, he again went for it, and he said that he saw a tectonic shift which accelerates. And he said that actually he saw investment in sustainability and climate solutions increasing. However, then the pandemic, Corona, arrived, and he said, I expected the investments to slow down or stop. And then he said, I saw the contrary happen. I saw it happening even faster. And he said that because of that, there is a rapidly accelerating transition, and he says that actually brings together or brings with it an opportunity. Of course, this is partly his analysis, partly also his call to the sector, because of course I think it's a tad more nuanced than what he says here, but we have to say what Larry Fink says, then the financial sector listens. And it does have a huge momentum, or creates a huge momentum when he talks. And because of that, you do see that also in investment talks, in whether you're getting loans or investment, sustainability becomes ever more important. And I think I heard some people talk about compliance. It's also just going to be, from a compliance perspective, just going to be necessary to do some things there already. Last but not least, if you take sustainable actions, set up sustainable initiatives, and you communicate about that, you can inspire other organizations to do the same. And for the transition that we need, the urgent transition that we need, it is important to get other companies along. This might sound counterintuitive in a competitive market space, but on this level we have to agree that we all need to row in the same boat, and that we all need to start taking those actions to move forward. And from a behavioral science perspective, we call that a solar panel effect, which we hope to achieve. Why do I call it a solar panel effect? Actually, if you try to explain why somebody puts solar panels on their roof, then the most logical explanation is that one of their neighbors got solar panels. That is, from research, the most strong denominator, or indicator, actually, of a solar panel. And that is just because we are all flock animals. We do what other people do. We're very social animals, so we constantly look around, what are other people doing? And if they're doing it, then it must be important, so we should do the same. Well, so you can do that as well by taking sustainable actions and talking about it. And I think you see now a current phenomenon around steward ownership, which is organizational model, a financial business model for your company, where actually you say that the profit of your organization will not just go to any shareholder anymore, but that it will actually go to your purpose as an organization. And it was actually not launched or invented, but it was made global news by the owner of Patagonia, or the founder of Patagonia, who in September 2022 wrote a letter to the world and said, our only shareholder is now the planet. And so they had shifted their organizational model to steward ownership, and it means that all of their profit is either going back into the organization to then also work on sustainable outdoor wear, or that the remaining profit would go to climate solutions and biodiversity protection initiatives. And that has had an effect. You now see an immense amount of companies also going towards steward ownership, of which also Sprinkler, which is a Dutch organization, and they sell plants. But they have also decided to go from, these are the two founders, and they have given their shares back. They are now just directors, so they're not owners anymore, and all of the profit is going to their mission, and that is biodiversity protection. So there are definitely some obvious reasons why we could go for it. it can really make your brand stronger. It is definitely an asset in the war for talent. On an investment level, it is already important, and it is going to be way more important in the future. And from the transition we desperately need, you can also really get other organizations along if you inspire them to do things. But there are definitely also some reasons why we should maybe not talk about sustainability as an organization. And first, maybe just some numbers around that. These are some numbers by the European Commission when they've done research around green claims. And they have found that 53% of green claims give vague, misleading, or unfounded information. 40% of the claims have no supporting evidence. Half of all green labels offer weak or non-existent verification. And there are 230 sustainability labels and 100 green energy labels in the EU with vastly different levels of transparency. And that is a problem. We really need to be aware that this level of vagueness and misinformation can give the general public a feeling that a lot is happening while in reality it isn't. And people might become more passive because of that, take less climate and other environmental action or sustainable actions themselves, and because of that, not really support the transition that we desperately need. So we do all have a role to play, and I'm going to start with morals first, right? So I do really want to give as a first reason why you should, but also shouldn't talk about sustainability at your organization if you are not really putting in the weight that it needs, is because of the moral question. You are then contributing to that misinformation and maybe a passive attitude in society. And there are companies which add to that in more or less degrees. And here I would also like to state that, and I'm going to give you some examples just to make it very tangible also today, that just because it is true doesn't necessarily make it right. Action is a company that sells a lot of different consumer products, very, very cheap. And they have a lot of trucks where they really focus their sustainability actions. You also nowadays really see them driving around. So try to spot the next sustainability claim when you're driving on the highways these days. But one of their claims now was this double-decker truck carries 60% more products than a regular truck, better for the environment and your wallet. So you could say, that's quite harmless, right? And it's true, it's a double-decker truck. It is carrying a lot more stuff. But of course, they really bring this on a brand level, this message, to immediately try to connect, we are better for the environment and your wallet. And in that sense, people are not gonna then go into every sustainability report and see what they're actually doing, right? So they're really using it here to uplift their brand, while we have to be honest, on a business model level, there is a lot of unsustainability happening still in the Action business model. So here, from a morality point of view, I'm not saying they can't say anything about sustainability, but this for me is a form of greenwashing, because you're really uplifting it to that level. If you just wouldn't do it from a moral perspective, then take into account that it really can have reputation damage. And this has for long been part of a debate a bit, you know, like you also have these quotes like, there's no such thing as bad news. Donald Trump has yelled this in the past. And sometimes, you know, like, yeah, of course, being present is also good for your brand, but we do get more and more indication that it really can harm your brand. Harvard Business Review has done research now in 2022 in America, where they've really found that for companies on your customer satisfaction score, it can start having an impact. And you see numbers here which are 1.34% drop, and then you say, like, is that it? But they also really place it in perspective, and they say it's not just that it, you know, in a very competitive space, if you have like a 1.30% drop, that means something for your reputation, and it can really have an impact on your bottom line, whether people are choosing for you or not. And they are making this analysis from the point of view of consumers kind of spotting greenwashing claims already in the shopping experience. But I would like to say that I think the reputation damage in the last year and the years to come is going to be increasingly bigger. Why? Because fines are coming. Companies are starting to really get spoken to, and they are starting to pay up for vague claims. What we see in the Netherlands is that you have the Authority for Consumers and Market has been analyzing some organizations, among which H&M and Decathlon. And they have found that they have been using vague claims, and for H&M, you see fashion and sustainability go hand in hand, is what they say everywhere, and then they had H&M conscious. So H&M conscious was kind of like the message that they were sending all of the time. And that was found as being too vague. The Decathlon claim, by the way, was that they just, in the beginning days, what I showed you now is their actual communication, but before they were just saying eco-design, eco-design. But they weren't backing it up. What is it? What does it actually mean? What does H&M conscious mean? What is it specifically? And because of that, it was labeled as too vague, and they kind of like mediated. They just agreed that then they had to pay 400,000 and 500,000 euros respectively to sustainable charities, and that was last year then okay. But anyway, already they're starting to have to pay up for these claims. But it's going further at the moment, and lawsuits are here. So the environmental movement has a new key strategy at the moment in fighting greenwashing, and that's "we'll see you in court." And I think also in the Netherlands, which is a bit ahead, I think, of Belgium in the market as what is happening at the moment, there I think the most talked about, of course, the Shell case is the most talked about, but that was really not so much of a greenwashing also with their ambitions. But against KLM, that's really a greenwashing lawsuit, which has been filed by Client Earth. And why? KLM actually made a big, broad marketing campaign about flying responsibly. So choose KLM and you fly responsibly. And why is that? Because there is a tiny of their money is going to biofuels, and then they're saying that you can offset a bit, of course, with a couple of euros you can offset your flight, which is not possible, people, right? The offsetting market is by now under a lens, and people are analyzing it and they're seeing it's full of crap, right? So all the climate neutral claims and everything out there at the moment are really not there yet. So lawsuits are coming, and this is gonna be coming faster and harder as well, because the European Commission has now in March 2023 agreed with a proposal for a directive for around green claims. So they really want to fight greenwashing, and so they really want to give some criteria and some rulings about how can you actually communicate around sustainability still. So there are definitely some good reasons for your organization to do talk about sustainability. Not in the least, and also me as an advocate of sustainable communications, don't get me wrong after this chapter. I understand the atmosphere has gone down a bit, but I am still an advocate of talking about sustainability because I do think it can speed up the transition. However, if we're not doing it right, we shouldn't do it. Out of a morality perspective, or just because your reputation might be harmed, you might get fined, or you might find yourself in court sooner rather than later. So what we need is we need some guidance today, and that is what the rest of the day is also going to focus around. You will talk about it amongst each other, but also I will give you now 3 pieces of advice about how I believe we can talk about sustainability in a good way. And it revolves around asking ourselves 3 key questions. The first off is, are we actually honest? When we say something around sustainability, is it true? Carbon neutral oil from Shell, that's not true, right? This is from a couple of years ago, marketing that you can buy carbon neutral oil. That's almost like complete not possible. You would have to do so aggressive amounts of offsetting and actually to make that work. But then there was also apparently sustainable packaging and everything, which then doesn't make sense because we're selling like pure oil here. Okay, I won't, everybody understands this is not true, right? Or at least like grossly exaggerated. You have the World Cup, right? Where they also advocated and marketed it and branded as a carbon neutral World Cup, which was, at the end of the day, not honest. It isn't. If you start really delving into that case, it is misleading, incredibly dangerous, and not in the end. And that is apart from, of course, the social drama which happened there, right? Because they also try to talk about that, and that's a whole another story. Now it gets into more muddy waters, because I think the last 2 were maybe more clear, but then this is already an interesting case, right? Primark cares. Okay, Primark cares, but that's really a brand level messaging that they're sending out there, so we care. And maybe some people in the room disagree with me, but I don't think this is honest. Primark is also a shopping chain which sends incredibly cheap clothing, and if you start browsing into that or checking the value chain, then you will find yourself very fast in Bangladesh in sweatshops, right? And do you really care then? You know, like we have to be honest here. Do you as an organization then want to say Primark cares? I'm not saying they're doing nothing good. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying Primark people are bad people as such. They are focusing on some stuff, but on that brand level, saying Primark cares, it's to me not honest communication. There are good examples, and I think what we have to take as a vantage point is for each and every organization in here, it's a journey. Also for Nono, by the way, I am not a sustainable company. Nobody is there yet. Nobody is there yet. Also Patagonia is not there yet, and you won't hear them saying they are a sustainable company. They are not. It's a journey for each and every one of us. And nobody has arrived yet, but what I think Brussels Beer Project does very well is they say it's an imperfect journey. Een onvolmaakte reis. We are not there yet, but we're trying to go there. This is what we're doing good, and this is what we're doing bad. And being open and transparent about that, even when you're a good company or a leading company, gives you so much more authenticity, and people are appreciating that. Also, sustainability experts appreciate this hugely. You also see other companies doing it. Oatly. Oatly is the oat milk in the dairy product. You could say also that they could be ballsy enough to say they are sustainable, right? They're fighting dairy, it's much less impact. But also they don't say we're a sustainable company. And when they talk about their sustainability report, they are very open in saying like, hey, this is what we're doing good, and nay, this is what we're still doing bad. Very open and transparent communication around that if you start delving into their sustainability reporting. So having that honest communication out there is key. And also just saying we're not going to talk about this because it's not honest is a good decision. The second question we have to ask ourselves, and piece of advice I would like to give you is it actually concrete what we are saying there? You have this kind of advertising. Right? So you have Adidas saying Stan Smith forever, always iconic, now more sustainable. And if you started delving into their communication, they did two more things. They say the shoe is 50% recycled and it had somewhere an end plastic waste logo which they were using. And because of that, somebody filed complaints against them. Because they said the 50% recycled is very vague. What is it actually? You know, does it come from recycled materials, or can you actually recycle this shoe, or and how does that happen then? The end plastic waste is overselling it for a product which is still not fully from recycled and cannot be recycled, so it's not gonna end plastic waste. So then this is an over-promising. So in that sense, this is not concrete. They're trying to keep it on an abstract level. And you might already feel it, but I'm going to spell it out. If you say sustainable, it is often already very dodgy area because you're trying to go to such a general level of communication that it almost always is vague unless you immediately back it up with how can this be concrete. Now, how can you be concrete? The European Commission is already also giving some guidance around that. So they say these are actually some claims which we see as good and are concrete. For example, packaging made of 30% recycled plastic, because you're specifying, hey, this aspect, exactly so much recycled plastic. That's concrete. This one, a company's environmental footprint is reduced by 20% since 2015. Also concrete. You're not saying we're sustainable or we care. No, you're saying very concretely, this is the progress we've made since this point. Because people also need to be aware of like, what does this actually mean? Or CO2 emissions linked to this product halved as compared to 2020. So giving that context is imperative to actually be concrete. If we go back to Decathlon, you've also heard they had some claims against them. I've also shown you some of their products. But if you just go to their home page, then there is a very concrete sustainability call to action. And that's actually right at the top here. And what they say is, I'm first going to speak it out in Dutch. We kopen je sportartikelen over, maak een afspraak. So they say, we will buy back or just buy your sporting wear or sporting articles, make an appointment. And that is extremely concrete sustainability communication. It's even hard to spot a sustainability communication, right? Because it doesn't say green, sustainable, circular, whatsoever. But this is at the core of what they're doing. Buying back sporting articles and then reselling that, repairing it, is actually a sustainable initiative, but they're not trying to brand it like that. So that is very just concrete communication around a core sustainability thing, which I can hugely appreciate. The third question, so we first said honesty is important. Second, make it concrete. And the third question we have to ask ourselves, is this relatively relevant? Put it in another way, is it proportionate when we talk about this? We have HSBC, which is a bank, very out there in the UK. And 2 years ago, they did advertising in the UK, which says climate change doesn't do borders. And they said, so that's why in the UK, we planted 2 million trees, and that will have a carbon offsetting of 1 point, da, 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 da. I can't read it here because the resolution is a bit off, but they say 2 million trees. That's what we did, right? Because climate change. What they handily forgot to mention is that at the exact same time, they are still contributing 8.7 billion into new oil and gas products. If you're doing this, then don't talk about your trees. And I'm saying this a bit harsh, but I do want to also get that message out there, because if you are not mentioning this at this point and you're also not mentioning it anywhere else, then you are here incredibly overselling what you are doing, because all of those trees are like vanquished with your next oil drilling. Also, relatively relevant means don't talk about stuff which is already legally obliged. For example, in Belgium, as of the 24th of January 2022, no new plastic straws and plastic cutlery and everything can ever be sold. If you say, hey, I've seen it still, it might be if they still had it in their inventory. Then it was still allowed to sell your inventory. But as of now, they can't do it. Imagine a fast food chain would then start now opening up and they say, and by the way, we're green because we don't have plastic straws. That is not proportionate or relevant, right? Because nobody can. You can only talk about stuff which you've decided voluntarily and where you can really differentiate yourself on. What is then, according to me, maybe a relevant thing? For me, this campaign, which has been done by Burger King. Burger King in Vienna actually launched a campaign which says normal oder mit Fleisch. And what this meant is actually that if you would go into an Austrian Burger King or in Vienna and you would order your Whopper, which is the classic Burger King burger, then you would get a plant-based burger. So they've actually switched the default from having meat products to actually having plant-based products. And if you want your meat burger, you can still get it, but you say, I want a meat option. So they've just switched the default around. And for me, that is relatively relevant. Why? It is their core product. It is their burger, and they've made a sustainable initiative around that. And then they want to communicate around that shift that they have done. That is definitely proportionate. You can do a big campaign around that, no problem, because that's really at the center of what you're doing. They're not talking about like some gimmicky thing they did somewhere that you, for example, that their box got a bit increased. By the way, if some people are getting a bit anxious at this moment, like, oh shit, we are talking about a lot of small stuff, it in essence doesn't have to be a problem as long as it's honest, as long as it's concrete, and you're not turning into a global national campaign, right? I'm not saying you can't mention small steps anywhere, because also internally, small steps are important to mention, maybe externally, but then also in a proportionate way. You're not going to turn it into your big campaign, because then you start feeling, of course, that it goes overboard. Talking about sustainability is going to be important. We will need to speak up to it in our personal lives as an organization as well. Not in the least to get people along, but also because there's a lot of potential benefits for your organization if you do this. However, from a moral point of view or from a reputational or financial point of view, we do need to refrain in some cases. And how can we actually do it in a way that we can reap the benefits but not go into the risks is by first off, just being honest with ourselves and our colleagues. Second, by trying to make the communication as concrete as possible. And thirdly, by only talking about relevant stuff. No stuff that is already legally obliged or that we feel is completely not proportionate to the other stuff we're doing as a company.